Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Xile here, back at it again with another war video. War seems to be the theme of the year 2026. Specifically, today we will be focusing on the imminent United States military intervention in Iran. I'm even so confident that this is going to happen that I'm going to tell you an exact date. I think that the US will be invading Iran on Saturday, February 28th. And if it doesn't happen on that day, then it's definitely happening in the coming weeks. I was right about Venezuela. I feel pretty confident about this one. So, we're going to take a look at what this conflict means, why it's happening. We'll go through some history. Like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, and let's jump into it. Alright, first of all, this is a very long video, so we're going to need to break it down piece by piece. We'll start with a history of Iran. Modern history, I should say. I'm not going back to the Sassanids or something. We'll also look at the modern geopolitics of the Middle East, basically all the nations and groups of nations where they all align themselves in relationship to each other. Then we'll look at the timeline of the past year or so. We'll talk about the casus belli, the reasons for war this time. We'll talk about what I think the war will actually look like, and then we'll talk about kind of what I think the fallout of some kind of war would be. Got it? Good. Let's go. Alright, first, let's discuss the modern-day history of Iran. First, though, I need to note some etymology. You may have heard this region be called Persia in the past, and that's typically what it was called in the past, but that is an exonym. An exonym meaning it is a name derived by the people that do not live in that land. Kind of like how we call it Germany, but the people in Germany call it Deutschland, okay? Same thing. And Persia is derived from Greek and Phoenician and Hebrew. It comes from Fars, which is the southern region of Iran close to Mesopotamia, and in the ancient past was the sort of civilizational heartland. It's where the Achaemenid Empire came from. Elam was a power in the Bronze Age, stuff like that. Iran, however, is an endonym, or Iran is an endonym derived from the actual language spoken in Iran, and with my southern accent, I say Iran. So you'll just have to accept that and bear with it for this video. Okay. So first up, we'll start with the Anglo-Iran Persian Oil Company, which was established by the British to extract oil from Iran, specifically around the time of World War II, and profits was split, and Iran received a paltry 16% of all revenue, which is, not the best arrangement, and they were understandably upset by that. And so the democratically elected government threatened to nationalize the oil company, basically seizing it from British control. And so the CIA and MI6 decided that that was a no-go, so they couped the government and installed Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as the Shah, Shah means king, in 1953. And this was the first Iranian change of government that we'll be discussing today. Then we get the big one, the big revolution, the 1978 Iranian Revolution. Basically, the people were fed up with the Shah and his rule, so they started a big protest that turned into a revolt, and the security forces ultimately aligned with the people. Ayatollah Khomeini was installed as the leader, and instead of a monarchy, the government was a theocracy. A theocracy means rule by religion, okay? So Shia Islam was declared the official state religion, and all laws were therefore derived from Shia Islam. This also started the Iran hostage crisis. If you've seen the movie Argo, that's what that is. It spanned from the last little year of Jimmy Carter's presidency and into Ronald Reagan's first year of presidency, and it can be argued that one of the reasons Reagan won was because of Jimmy Carter's failure to actually end the crisis and get the hostages home. Anyway, after this coup, you could say, our old friend Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, sensed weakness and decided to invade Iran. Ironically, this had the opposite effect. Iran was indeed in a very shaky, unstable position right after the revolution, but this war helped unite the country around a common enemy. At first, Iraq did very well, but as soon as they reached those mountains, which we'll talk more about later, it basically turned into a trench warfare stalemate mess, and it lasted for like 10 years. It was a huge clusterfuck, to be honest. It was really bad, and incidents such as the Iranian shooting down of Iran Airlines Flight 6X5 and strikes on the USS Samuel B. Roberts led us to side with Iraq against Iran, as did several other powers. However, China supported Iran. So then we get to more modern times. So after the Iran-Iraq War, it basically ended a stalemate. And funny enough, that's why Saddam invaded Kuwait, was to steal their oil and money to pay off all the debt that he accrued during the Iran-Iraq War. Fun fact. Anyway, we get to the Obama years. Obama does this thing called the Iran nuclear deal. And the Iran nuclear deal said, we don't want you to have a nuke because we think you're an enemy of the United States, and we think your Shia Islam makes you crazy and apocalyptic and stuff. So you're not allowed to enrich weapons-grade uranium, but in exchange, we will lift some of the sanctions on your regime and stop punishing you so much economically. And the whole deal was monitored by the IAEA, the International Atomic Agency, and there were many, many countries that backed this deal, from the Middle East, from Europe, and North America. A lot of people were behind this. It was a very successful, admittedly, piece of diplomacy. Then we get to Trump's first term. He pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal illegally and basically tore the whole thing up. Of course, now he's trying to renegotiate a deal with them. We'll get back to that later, but just thought that was pretty ironic. And when he tried to propose that they renegotiate the deal, he struck the site that the negotiations were supposed to occur with a missile and assassinated General Soleimani. General Soleimani, you know, he's a very controversial figure, to say the least, but it is undeniable that he helped America fight ISIS. He helped Syria fight ISIS. He helped Iraq fight ISIS. So he was very important in the fight against ISIS, and us striking him was seen as kind of a breach of trust, a very bad faith action. All right, now let's go through the modern geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. So first up, we have Israel. I'll talk more about Israel in detail later in the video, but from a geopolitical perspective, nominally Israel is an American ally, although they've been increasingly acting in ways that go against the interests of the United States. They have strained relations with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. One of the things Trump did during his first term was the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel, the Gulf states, and Saudi Arabia. So while the relationship has been increasingly strained in this past year, during Trump's first term and Biden's term, they're actually on pretty good relations, pretty good terms. And Israel is the arch enemy of Iran. They're basically, they're mortal enemies, okay? Then we have Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, you can think of them as kind of the fulcrum on which geopolitics turns. So whichever camp between, the giant BRICS alliance and the giant, U.S.-led NATO coalition, whichever one of those Saudi Arabia joins will have enormous power and leverage over the other. And that's why both the United States and China work so hard to court Saudi Arabia. Right now, the U.S., I think, is winning the influence war over Saudi Arabia, especially with Trump's tour there last year. But the Saudi Arabian government is very pragmatic. They're not really ideologically motivated, so they will do whatever is in their most self-interest. Okay. They are the spiritual leader of all Sunni Muslims because they control the cities of Mecca and Medina, and all Muslims must go to Mecca at least once in their lives to do the Hajj. They also are an enemy of Iran because Saudi Arabia is Sunni, while Iran is Shia. Those are the two main branches of Islam. But actually, recently, their relations have been getting a little better. Although, having said that, I think they just recently signed a defensive alliance with Pakistan and Oman, I believe, to kind of try and box in Iran geopolitically and diplomatically. Also, the Yemeni civil war is a proxy war between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states. Speaking of the Gulf states, these are the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, and kind of Oman, maybe if you want to include them. So Saudi Arabia is the fulcrum on which geopolitics turns. The Gulf states are the fulcrum on which the Middle East politics turns, and again, it's because of their access to oil and natural gas. They're not always unified geopolitically and diplomatically, but it's more useful, I think, to think of them as a bloc than to think of them as individual separate countries. They basically just want to sell oil. They don't really care what they have to do as long as the oil keeps flowing and they keep making money. They're basically happy with whatever. They just want peace and stability above everything else, okay? So they are not that ideologically driven, they're not that ideologically motivated, and they don't really have any big, grand geopolitical ambitions like Iran, Saudi Arabia, or Israel do. And then finally we have the United States. We are an ally of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and we have pretty good relations with the Gulf states, and that is actually something that I support Trump doing, is pursuing friendly relations with those Gulf states and with Saudi Arabia. I think that is a good move strategically from a geopolitical stance. We are the big enemy of Iran, and we have been for a long time. I mean, you can go watch George Bush's Axis of Evil speech from, like, what was that, 2000 or 2001. So yeah, it's been like that for pretty much my whole lifetime. Although it is worth noting that our exact how harsh we are against Iran does change based on which administration is in power. Trump went on that big tour of the Middle East in, I think that was last April or May, and he strengthened ties in the region. Trump and the Emiratis and the Saudis understand each other, I think. I think they're all basically corrupt, uber wealthy businessmen who have no morals and no ideology and just want to bathe in money. So I think they understand each other on a fundamental level, and the Saudis are very good at playing Trump like a fiddle, right? They appeal to his narcissism. The Qataris gave him, a $400 million jet. They're basically bribing him. Some of the money that Trump stole from Venezuela in the form of oil sales has been put in a Qatari bank account. So they all understand each other perfectly well, and they're basically all in it just to make a bunch of money. And of course, our number one priority in the Middle East is to make sure that the oil keeps flowing. It's not even necessarily for us. Like, the United States, if push came to shove, could be self-sufficient when it came to oil. Really, it's so that our allies such as Japan, South Korea, and Europe don't implode. That's why we need the constant flow of oil to those places. That's why we need peace in the Middle East. And finally, we have Iran. So Iran pretty much hates Israel and the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. They have very complicated relations with the Gulf states. Sometimes they're on the same side, sometimes they're not. It's kind of a give and take relationship. They are allied to China and Russia. They have been supplying Russia with drones and parts in their ongoing war in Ukraine, and the Shahid drones have actually been fairly effective. And like I said earlier, they are the religious defenders of Shia Islam. All right, now let's go through the timeline of events. I should also mention I made most of this PowerPoint back before Donald Trump bombed Iran last June. So this timeline focuses specifically on the lead up to that, and then I have one little blurb about what's happening right now. It's just funny that this is all happening again, so I dusted off this PowerPoint, and now I'm actually sitting down to record, because the last time I tried to record this, he bombed Iran a day later, and it was too late for me to actually post it. So this time I'm jumping the gun, I'm getting ahead of it. Yeah. Okay. On April 12th last year, Trump proposed a new, brand spanking new Iran nuclear deal. I genuinely think Trump wants peace, okay? I think he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. He wants to be known as the guy who ended war in the Middle East forever, even though that's obviously not going to happen. He does not want war, okay? I truly believe that when he is trying to negotiate this deal, he is being sincere. The deal is functionally the same as the Obama deal, except for the U.S. monitors instead of the International Atomic Agency. The problem with that is Iran would never allow U.S. observers into their nuclear facilities, because that's tantamount to giving up sovereignty. So I don't think they will ever accept that, and I don't think from the American side any deal we propose will be shouted down by Israel. Israel was opposed to the first deal negotiated under Obama, and they will be opposed to any deal that Trump tries to make now. So then we have Operation Rising Lion, which was the Israeli strikes against Iran. Nuclear sites were targeted. Military and civilian infrastructure were hit. The first thing they did, however, was disable all of their air defense systems. Smart move. It's unclear exactly how many people died, but it was probably over 100. Then Iran retaliated, and Israel retaliated back, and Iran retaliated back, and Israel retaliated back. So this started kind of a tit-for-tat exchange of missiles and bombs that went on for a little over a week. Most of the drones and missiles on the Israeli side were intercepted by the Iron Dome. Really, Iran is just doing this to save face. They don't actually believe that they can meaningfully, damage Israel, or at least they could do that, but it would require them pretty much exhausting their missile stockpiles, and they didn't want to do that. So they launched, a couple dozen missiles at a time, which they knew would be intercepted. I think there were like 5 or 6 that made it through, but ultimately it was really just a face-saving maneuver. And this, of course, closed the airspace over the entire Middle East for like a week and a half. It was pretty ridiculous. Then we get the United States dropping the bomb in Operation, I think it was called Midnight Hammer. We targeted 3 nuclear sites using B-2 stealth bombers. And the primary enrichment facility at Fordo was hit with multiple bunker buster bombs. There we go. However, a intelligence report from American intelligence says A, that the sites were not destroyed, B, that no radiation from satellites was detected. There's a theory that the uranium was actually moved beforehand because they knew that the strike was coming. Someone warned them. And despite, Trump and Hegseth and everyone claiming this was a huge success and their nuclear program had been destroyed and yada, 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 people were, of course, still questioning, well, was it really destroyed? Did this actually accomplish anything? And Pete Hegseth had a press conference where he threw a little temper tantrum about it, and it was pretty funny to watch him whine like a little bitch. Okay, and now we get to today. In February 2026, we have a gigantic fleet armada positioned in the seas around Iran. This information here is actually, pretty old now, almost a week old, in fact. There are more assets in the region, particularly cargo planes and more aircraft have been moved in. We got the Gerald Ford, which is the largest naval vessel currently afloat. I'm seeing reports that the sailors on the Gerald Ford have no working toilets or something. I don't know. They seem pretty upset. Seems pretty miserable, just floating in the middle of the ocean all day, waiting for the order to, shell the coast of Iran. But you can read through this slide if you want. Pause the video if you want. These are all of the ships and planes and missile batteries and stuff that we have in the area. Oh, one more thing we've been heavily moving into the region is air defense systems. We need air defense systems because Iran's primary weapons are missiles and drones. So we need as many air defense systems as we can to shoot down all of those drones and missiles, which will come raining down. All right, now let's talk about the casus belli, or the cause for war. By the way, if you know what game this screenshot is from, you're my friend and you're also a super nerd. Okay, first we got to talk about the N-word. Let's talk about the nukes. Nobody wants to talk about the nukes. Everyone wants to talk about the nukes. So, first of all, this whole kind of framework, this whole justification is based on what I think is a lie. Okay, so the argument goes that Iran's government is inherently irrational because of their religious nature and therefore cannot be trusted with a nuclear bomb. In general, countries and leaders act in their own rational self-interest, but obviously ideology can trump this. The population of Iran, however, is more secular than you would think. I've met a couple people from Iran. They're just normal people. They don't, think anything crazier than your average evangelical Christian. And in many cases, they're a lot saner than your more wild branches of American Christianity. The leaders basically just use religion as an excuse to legitimize their own governance. Okay, so the actual population of Iran is fairly secular. Also, Pakistan, India, and Russia all have state religions, and their religion and their state are heavily intertwined. So the argument that just because Iran is, Shia Islam means that they are inherently untrustworthy of having a nuke because they think that even if all of them die, they'll get, 72 virgins in heaven or whatever is nonsense. I don't think that's true. Okay, so there are a couple possibilities when it comes to Iran having a nuke. Either they're nowhere close to a bomb, which I think is the most likely option. They have what's called a Swiss bomb. So a Swiss bomb means that you are very close to completing your nuke, but you just decide not to finish it for political reasons. Switzerland actually did this. They got extremely close to building a nuclear weapon, and then in the last minute they were like, you know what if we just didn't do that? And then they basically released all their information to the IAEA, and everyone was like, Jesus Christ, I can't believe we didn't know how close Switzerland was to building a nuke. So yeah, that was a funny little story. Or they could be very close to building a bomb, which I think is unlikely, or they already have the bomb, which is super unlikely, because if they had the bomb, I think they probably would have already used it, or at least done a nuclear test to show it off. Steve Witkoff went on Fox News this week and said that Iran is, quote, 1 week away from having a nuclear weapon. If you go back and watch Benjamin Netanyahu speak on this issue, Iran has been 6 months away from a nuclear weapon since at least 2014. And every year or so, he would keep repeating it. 6 months away, 6 months away, 6 months away. And also, we literally just struck all of their sites in June, and I thought that completely destroyed their nuclear program and set it back, years. So we're forced to accept a line of doublethink if we're following the presidential administration's logic. Because simultaneously, the nuclear program was destroyed in the most successful strikes in American history, which happened in June, but also the nuclear program wasn't destroyed and they're 1 week away from building a bomb, and we need to bomb them again. Both can't be true at the same time, and it doesn't look good when you have to accept doublethink as like a precursor to any arguments you're going to make. There's also the military-industrial complex to consider. So, companies such as Raytheon, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin hold immense influence in the U.S. government. It is almost impossible to overstate how much money and how many politicians are loyal to these companies. And these companies want war. War is good for business. If everybody's at peace, nobody needs weapons, these countries don't make any money. These companies don't make any money. So, for example, we saw this with Israel and Gaza. Israel needed weapons. The United States would give them weapons in the form of, those billion-dollar aid packages. And then our military would cry, oh no, our stockpiles of, whatever mortar shell or Iron Dome rocket are running low. We need to order more, and then we'd order more from these companies, and then these companies would make money, and that's just an endless cycle. So the theory is if we go to war with Iran, somehow, some way, we will lose some military equipment. That military equipment will then need to be replaced, and that will increase the shareholder value of all of these massive companies. There are 1.5 defense industry lobbyists for every member of Congress. Okay, that includes House and Senate. So there are people whose full-time job it is to wine and dine and schmooze with Congress people to try and convince them to go to war. That's how you got the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and that's why even today you won't see mainstream media or Democrats push back against this very hard. I mean, seriously, go look on CNN or MS Now or whatever. You won't see people, getting up moral outrage about this. They'll at most they'll say, they're unsure as to why this is happening, but they'll never question the fundamental logic of why we even need to be the world police, why we need to go to war in the first place. They just won't do it. And then we get to the big dog, Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay. It was a very controversial topic. I purposely have avoided talking about Israel on this channel up until now, but when we're dealing with Iran, it is unavoidable. So, first of all, just a note about Benjamin Netanyahu personally, okay? Before the October 7th attack, he was under investigation by the Israeli government for corruption, but once that attack happened, the trial was put on hold, and it, to this day, is still on hold. He is extremely unpopular domestically. His approval rating is almost as bad as Donald Trump's. If the war were to end, it would mean he would go to jail, or at least it would be the end of his government, and he doesn't want that, okay? So he is prolonging the war, and by the war I mean all conflict in the Middle East, okay? Not just the war in Gaza. Israel has bombed Lebanon every week for the past 2 years. They're still bombing Lebanon, even though they, signed a ceasefire with Hamas, and they've mostly held to that recently, but not always. And then, of course, there's this whole Iran situation, and if the United States and Israel were to attack Iran, that would mean the war would drag on even longer. Oh, also, Israel's been doing military actions in Syria as well. So, this week, Mike Huckabee, who is the United States ambassador to Israel, had an interview with Tucker Carlson, and I will leave a link down to this interview in the description. But there was one very troubling moment from this interview. And basically, what Tucker Carlson said was, you're saying that Jews have a ancestral claim to Israel because of Genesis, but in the book of Genesis it says that Israel is the land that exists between the Nile and the Euphrates River, which covers all of Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, modern-day Israel, most of Iraq, and parts of Saudi Arabia. Do you think it's okay that Israel is claiming or wants to take that land? And Mike Huckabee basically said, yeah, it's fine if they want all that. It's fine if they take all that. So we have, and he's not just some guy, right? This is not just some random official. This is the ambassador. The ambassador is saying the formation of Greater Israel is A-okay. It has the thumbs up approval from the United States government, which is insane. And then finally, the last little piece of this puzzle is there's this guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. His name's Jeffrey Epstein. Since the most recent batch of files have been released, there have been many, 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 many ties linking him to Mossad, linking him to Israel. He was BFFs apparently with the former Prime Minister of Israel, Barak. I forgot what his first name is. So the theory goes that he has some compromising material on Donald Trump and has in the past forwarded that material to Mossad, to the Israeli government, and they are now basically blackmailing Trump into supporting war with Iran. Finally, there is a religious component to this. All right, this is going to sound kind of crazy, especially if you don't live in the US. This is going to sound absolutely nuts, but it's real. It's happening. So, first of all, I already know I'm going to get comments calling me an anti-Semite. Fun fact, losers, I'm actually Jewish. I don't think I've admitted that on the channel, but checkmate. So you calling me an anti-Semite for saying that what Israel is doing is wrong is actually anti-Semitic, because you're basically implying that all Judaism is inherently associated with Israel, and any attack on Israel is inherently an attack on all Jews, and that is ridiculous. You are allowed to criticize the actions of a sovereign nation. You just are. There's no, that'd be like me saying, the attacking or criticizing the actions of Prince Andrew is an attack on the Anglican Church. Like, no, it just isn't, okay? So that's the first thing. A lot of people have this narrative that this whole conflict in the Middle East is like a civilizational, cultural, deterministic clash between, East and West, between the Occident and the Orient. I don't really like this framing, but I understand why people follow it. You could almost think of what's happening right now as a continuation of the Crusades, right? You could say Israel is like a modern-day Crusader state, and we're basically giving them free reign and a bunch of military power to go out and conquer more land for the sake of Christendom, or in this case, Western civilization, whatever the hell that means. So there definitely is a component of that to this. The last thing is the super, super hardcore Christian evangelical fundamentalist reading of the Bible, which says in the book of Revelations that in order for Jesus to return and start the rapture, Israel needs to control what we talked about earlier, that greater Israel, all the territory between the Nile and Euphrates River. So this is why there are so many Christian evangelicals that support Israel. In fact, they often call themselves Christian Zionists, because they believe that Israel needs to wage war, needs to conquer, and once that happens, then the apocalypse will start, and of course, them being all the goody two-shoes gets to go to heaven while the rest of us are stuck on Earth, which is now like hell. It sounds ridiculous, but it's absolutely true. And especially now that the right is in charge in America, many high-ranking officials in the Trump administration hold this ideology. Anytime you hear the phrase Christian Zionism, this is what they are talking about, okay? The biblical need for Jews to control the Middle East. All right, now we'll talk about what the actual kinetic war is going to look like. The first option is the rain of bombs, where we basically have no boots on the ground. We just bomb the absolute shit out of them. I think everybody knows that a Iraq-style regime change in Iran is impossible. So there is literally no point in putting boots on the ground. Okay, I think most people in the Trump administration knows this. What exactly the end game here for this path is unclear, because the reasons for going to war in the first place are unclear. So we're going to war without a goal. It's hard to say what it would take for us to stop the war, for us to stop the bombing campaign. If we were to do a regime change, this guy pictured here, Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, is the #1 candidate to lead the government, but he's lived in America basically his whole life, and they might as well call him John CIA, because he was raised by the CIA, he was trained by the CIA. Yeah, he's just a total CIA plant, essentially, or at least he would be if he was in power. So, that being said, I think this option is still the most likely, because it would commit the fewest amount of resources from the perspective of America. So the other option is a boots-on-the-ground style Iraq invasion. So, with the possible exception of Afghanistan, Iran is literally the worst country to invade on Earth. The whole country, except for a very thin strip of grasslands in the north by the Caspian Sea, is mountains and deserts. You couldn't ask for worse topography, okay? So, we might be able to push up to the mountains. There's a thin coastal plain separating the coast in the Persian Gulf from the mountains. We might be able to capture that, but actually advancing into the interior, and especially advancing all the way to Tehran, is basically impossible unless something truly disastrous happened within the internal security or political situation in Iran. I also don't think that if the U.S. were to invade, much like in Venezuela, that we'd be seen as a liberator. I think the Iranian populace has been conditioned enough to hate America that they would not support any form of intervention, and I don't really think that they're wrong in doing that. I don't think that, we're invading Iran with the intention of making life better for the average Iranian citizen. Even though the average Iranian citizen does hate their government, I don't think that means they would love America. So if this does happen, I could foresee a situation where basically, the war drags on for like a year. The Ayatollah loses power. It causes a power vacuum, and basically Iran goes the way of Syria. There's already a branch of ISIS active in Iran called ISIS-K, ISIS Khorasan, and they are actively fighting in I believe it is eastern Iran and western Afghanistan, so I could see them gaining power. There are some ethnic minorities in Iran, such as the Azerbaijanis. I could see breaking away. Basically, it would be a giant Syria-style, multi-sided civil war that would completely destroy the country and completely destabilize the entire region, and would basically be bad for everybody. And the U.S. then would, of course, as the one who caused all this, be in charge of putting all the pieces back together, which we are famously bad at doing. So, yeah. Alright, this video is already long enough as it is, so let's go ahead and wrap things up. So, the first major problem with this upcoming conflict is that it is very possible that the Straits of Hormuz will close if this conflict actually starts. What this means is that all oil exports from Iraq, Kuwait, Iran, Bahrain, Qatar, and most of the ones from the UAE and some of the ones from Saudi Arabia would no longer have access to the global market. This would cause the price of oil to surge, and China and Europe would suffer the most, whereas America would actually benefit because a higher price of oil means it is more profitable for our domestic oil companies to frack and extract oil in the United States. This would cause a stupid spike in inflation, even though inflation is up right now. The price of gas is actually down, but this would cause the price of gas to go up, which would make inflation just absolutely soar. I mean, I'm talking like it could be double digits. Like it would be terrible, terrible, terrible. This has also caused somewhat of a civil war in the MAGA movement. I'm actually making a whole video on this topic right now about the various internal conflicts and contradictions within MAGA right now. But one of the first big splits we saw was that initial Trump strike back in June. You had the so-called MAGA true believers who were in favor of the no new wars, the President for Peace, all that jazz, who actually wanted that, versus all the people who are just grifting for the money and the fame and the power, who immediately upon Trump striking Iran were doing mental gymnastics and somersaults to try and justify it and say that it's actually a genius 400 IQ play. You know how they are. So basically none of them have any real principles. They all flipped on their, anti-interventionist, anti-war stance as soon as it was clear that Trump was going to be an interventionist president. I think this is most exemplified in a interview Ted Cruz did with Tucker Carlson back in, I think this was in June. It was very funny, one of the funniest interviews I've ever watched, to just watch Ted Cruz flounder like the little weasel that he is, and basically try and do the mental gymnastics necessary to say the Trump line that, he's for peace, he doesn't want war and stuff, no regime change wars, but then also try and justify what we're doing in Iran. And basically he couldn't do it because it's impossible to square that circle. And to all the MAGA people who are watching this and think, well, I didn't think that, President Trump would start any wars. I didn't think he would try and block the Epstein files. I didn't think he would make my life unaffordable. I didn't think he would deport my neighbor or my gardener or whatever. There's a tweet I want you to read, okay? I'll read it for you in case you have mental difficulties. All right, you ready? I never thought leopards would eat my face, sobs woman who voted for the leopards eating faces party. This is one of the most famous tweets and sort of political in-jokes of all time. And basically what it means is you knew what you were voting for. Like if you didn't know Trump was lying about the Epstein files or about, being an interventionist president, I don't know what to tell you. You're just kind of an idiot. Okay, the scariest part of all this for me is that in the lead up to the Iraq War, we had 2 years of consent manufacturing. 2 years of the mainstream media and the government saying every day, all day, why we needed to go to war in Iraq, why, how dangerous Saddam Hussein was, why we needed the weapons of mass destruction, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The thing is, this time, nobody can figure out why we're doing this. Trump doesn't seem to know because he doesn't want this. I actually believe Trump does not want this war, but the powers that be, aka Israel, aka the military-industrial complex, aka other members of his administration, are basically pushing him to do this. So because of that, he's been kind of too lazy to come up with an excuse this time, and so the whole thing is just falling flat on its face. The media and the government isn't even bothering to manufacture consent this time. They're just gonna do this strike, and people are either going to be with it or they're going to be against it, and they're going to declare anybody who is, they're going to pull Marjorie Taylor Greene and exile anybody who's against it out of the MAGA movement, out of the Republican Party, because they have to. If you live in the U.S., you've probably seen a huge uptick in military recruitment ads. Military recruitment is way down, especially because Pete Hegseth is a moron and continually does everything he can to drive away recruits and make, 5-star generals retire and basically drive out anybody who believes in competence instead of Instagram reels as their guiding military principle. So he's doing us no favors, and military recruitment is way down. That's why they're spending so much on military ads, because they need to replenish all the soldiers that we are losing and all the soldiers that we are going to lose in the wars in the future. We're also circling back on the whole weapons of mass destruction thing. Every freaking time is the weapons of mass destruction. Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Iran has weapons of mass destruction. Maduro's drugs are weapons of mass destruction. It's always the weapons of mass destruction. But again, like I said earlier, they're not even. I mean, like sure, Steve Witkoff told like a half-hearted bullshit. They're 1 week away from from a nuke line, but nobody believes that. Even the people on Fox News didn't buy that shit. So it's yeah. They're really scrambling. That's the word. They're definitely scrambling here, trying to find any justification. And I think all this wraps back around to Trump's own ego. Really, he just wants the Nobel Peace Prize. That's why he's pushing so hard to negotiate. I think the negotiations are largely a smokescreen. So while Trump does want the negotiations to go forward, the negotiating team is putting forth demands that they know Iran will not be able to accept, so that way when they don't accept it, they have a reason to declare war. Okay? If, however, this war goes on in a relatively short amount of time, I could definitely see Trump trying to spin it as, he bombed Iran to destroy the nuclear program again, and now we can have peace forever in the Middle East. Norway, give me a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm a big boy. I deserve it. Okay. That was emotionally and physically exhausting. I hope I covered everything. Leave a comment if you have any questions. Like and subscribe if you liked the video. Like I said, I'm working on a scripted video about the civil war going on in the MAGA movement right now. So look forward to that. And stay tuned on Saturday for the news of the upcoming invasion. All right. Thank y'all so much. I'll catch y'all on the flip side.